Authenticity isn't something you manufacture. It's something you experience.
At Holiday Valley, winter unfolds across fun slopes and the true ski town of Ellicottville. Ranked number 4 in the East by Ski Magazine. Winter is better here.
Hey, welcome to a new episode of Skin in the Game. This is your host, John Cimperman, with my co-host,
Tim O'Shea. Great to be with you, John.
Tim. It's going to be a football episode of Skin in the Game as the NFL season here is wrapping, or by the time this is aired, probably wrapping up. But I got to tell you, we hit, to use a baseball term, a home run with our upcoming guest.
Yeah, we sure did, John. And I'm always good for a football episode, and I know you are too. We
were overdue. We were due.
We like to vary it up here on Skin in the Game, but hey, we love football. We love talking football, and today we've got DeMaurice Smith, the longtime and now former executive director of the NFL Players Association. Incredible guests who wrote one of the most interesting books I've read in a long time, Turf Wars.
Yeah. Wow. And by the way, first of all, thanks for bringing DeMaurice to the show. I mean, 15 years he led the NFL Players Association, which I will argue were probably the most dramatic 15 years in the NFL history. I mean, he shepherded in, along with, a lot of great players, very, very important times in the NFL. And what a character he is. And I say character in a good way, tons of energy. He was just a great person to sit down with.
Oh, he's fun to talk to. Now,
Yeah.
I will say, John, and we get into this in the conversation with him, if you are somebody he worked with, negotiated with across the aisle, I don't know that all those guys would say DeMaurice Smith is, a fun,
Yeah.
a fun conversation partner. He's got it in him, but yeah, I mean, you can tell when you read the book and when you hear him talk. DeMaurice, who is a lawyer by training and by profession, he's tough. He comes in with a strong pro-player, pro-union mentality, which is, of course, exactly what you'd expect.
Right.
He has tough opinions about NFL officials, tough opinions about NFL owners, and that's fine.
That's fine.
That's good, and it makes for great conversation and fascinating reading.
Yeah, well, I got to tell you, if I were a player if I needed, any legal representation, DeMaurice Smith is someone I'd love to have, in my court.
Oh, God, if you're a football player, you want him on your side,
Yeah,
and that's what he was for 15
yeah.
years.
So the book is, and we're going to get into it, Turf Wars, The Fight for the Soul of America's Game. Great book, and we both had a chance to read it. So looking forward, and really encourage our listeners to stay tuned to our interview with DeMaurice Smith. But before that, let's talk a little news. And since it's kind of a football-themed episode, lots to get into right now. And Tim, I think, speaking of labor and player representation, it does not look like the players right now, according to their words, have the appetite for an 18-game schedule. In other words, adding another regular season game to the schedule.
Yeah, and this has been a conversation for so long, right? I mean, first it was, how do we get, from the NFL's point of view, from 16 to 17? DeMaurice Smith writes about that one in Turf Wars, right?
Yeah.
And now, going up to 18, I can't say I'm surprised. Were you? Because I didn't see this coming.
No, not at all surprised. I've something. This is all about negotiation, and but there are some concerns. Injury concerns. Just look at the NFL season now. You've got so many stars and so many players who are getting hurt games 14, 15, 16. So and personally, this is my opinion. I don't think the NFL should continue to add games because you really start to dilute the product. Not only, the players, susceptible to injury, but also, what made the NFL so special was must-see viewing, limited schedule. Every game matters. And when you start to add games, in my opinion, you start to dilute the product.
which is interesting too. And I agree with you. When you think about it from the NFL point of view, you're creating product, right? You're creating product you can put on TV, put in front of sponsors, put out there for sponsors to pay for. What do you think, John, is the tipping point? How much is, maybe it seems the answers, but how much is too much?
Yeah, well, and again, if you add an 18th game, you also, and the league just announced it's going to do a minimum of 8 international games next year. Australia, Paris have been added to the schedule. So not only adding an 18th game, but then you look at the wear and the tear on the players and the staffs, to be traveling to these international games. You know, in my humble opinion, I think we're at that point. I think we're at that point where, you know, let's build the game, let's strengthen the schedules, but international travel, an 18th game, I don't know when enough is enough, but I think we're getting close.
Yeah, and I'm glad to see, and I've been glad for a long time to see the NFL expanding its geographic reach. I remember back, gosh, we're talking probably 15 years ago or more when the Buffalo Bills, being so close to Toronto, 2 hours away, less than 2 hours away, started playing games in Toronto, which was not popular with Bills fans. It wasn't particularly popular in Toronto either. It wasn't, they didn't have the success they wanted. But I remember even back then, I was writing columns saying, this is a good idea. This is a great game that has a lot of reach. And I don't know if I was right about that one, but I am glad to see the NFL really stretching around the globe. I get your point, though. I mean, the wear and tear on the players, taking away product from the home game fan or the
Right.
home team fans too. You really do have to strike a balance there. And yeah, maybe, I mean, stretching it to 18, you might just be pushing your roster
Yeah.
a little
Right.
too far.
Right.
And it comes back to the injuries, which is another thing. I mean, DeMaurice Smith and Turf Wars writes all about, right? Like
Right.
keeping these men safe and how the NFL needs to do more, in his view.
Right. 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 Well, we'll see how this. The players' collective bargaining agreement goes through 2030. There's going to be a lot of conversation about this over the next few years, few months. Um, but we'll interested, and I got a hunch, and we listened to the interview coming up with DeMaurice Smith that there will be, we'll make sure we bring that up as well. Um, Hey, Tim, I just wanted to just give you a highlight and just kind of get a check of your bank account. I'm thinking about we might want to run a spot in the Super Bowl this year for skin in the game.
I think we
Uh,
should. Yeah. I'll go
yeah,
halves with you. How much
yeah.
will
So
half
that would
cost
be
me?
that would be $5 million a piece because right now the going rate
Sure.
for a Super Bowl commercial is $10 million.
I mean, as long as we make it a good one, like a real. What would a good one be, John? That's your
Yeah,
area.
yeah, and, just for our listeners, just for reference, the first Super Bowl ad ever in 1967 ran about $37,000. So today, $10 million. Just goes to show, the power of the NFL and the strength of their viewership.
What is your favorite ever Super Bowl ad?
Oh boy. I just call me old school nostalgia. It's got to be the Clydesdales, right? That's just Americana, and those are probably the ones that are always most memorable.
Good call. I'll go with that.
So yeah, so looking forward to this interview. Please stay with us. Today we're talking to DeMaurice Smith, the author of Turf Wars and 15 years leading the NFL Players Association in some very and very important times. So stay tuned for that interview. Skin in the Game. We'll be right back.
Authenticity isn't something you manufacture. It's something you experience.
At Holiday Valley, winter unfolds across fun slopes and the true ski town of Ellicottville. Ranked number 4 in the East by Ski Magazine. Winter is better here.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back to Skin in the Game. DeMaurice Smith, thank you for joining us.
Man, just a pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
Pleasure to have you. I know I speak for John and for myself. We really both enjoyed reading Turf Wars. I will tell you, for people out there who are football fans or absolutely, and I haven't met anyone who's in love with the NFL. They're in love with
Yeah.
teams, not with the league. But for those who want a feel-good story about football, it's not quite that. But if
Yeah,
they
I
want a
think
candid story
yeah.
about what makes this game move forward, or maybe what stops the game from moving forward, you really delivered. So yeah, tell us about your motivation for writing the book.
Yeah, I mean, I think you hit the nail on the head. If for the people who just want to live in the pure fan world, go see the Ronald Reagan win one for the Gipper movie, perhaps even Rudy. But I wanted to write a book that framed really the history of the league, put it in context of obviously my nearly 15 years of running a labor union. I didn't want to ignore the importance of trade unionism, not only for the NFL players, but also the way trade unionism has fit so importantly, or I should say, impactfully, in the American story. But also not shy away from issues of race and power, and money. And look, I never wanted to write a book that turned every NFL fan into a hater. I wanted to write a book that hopefully made you even enjoy the game more, knowing that there is this battle royale going on behind the scenes that, as some of my friends would say, perhaps makes you a more ethical watcher. And for that, I knew that certainly that there was going to be some people who read the book that wouldn't necessarily be happy. I'm pretty sure I'm not going to be getting any holiday gifts from the owners. If that box arrived at the door, I'd perhaps give it to John to open.
Right.
But I wanted to write a book that was true. Obviously, it's from my perspective, but as you both know, there's a lot of lore that goes around sport, and a lot of that is good. There's a lot of lore that goes around sport, and I think for a lot of reasons, a lot of it is bad.
Yeah.
And turf wars is something that I wanted to write a book that I thought, Saul Alinsky would dig.
Yeah. DeMaurice, hey, again, thanks again for joining us. I was kind of blown away by the attention to detail and the recollection of stories that, go back, what, 14,
Yeah.
15 years? I mean, how did you must have been one heck of a note taker back in the day because just, those stories seem so topical.
Yeah.
How did you how did you go back into, 14 years of history to
I
rekindle
would
that?
I would show you the rest of my office, but I would be embarrassed. It is my office is just full of notebooks. And one of the best pieces of advice I got when I my first year in law school, my philosophy professor, they didn't call it journaling back then. He said, Keep a diary."
Mhm.
And that became really something that started in 1986 and never ended. It was, the nature of the job in the National Football League, especially if you kind of find yourselves as we did from anybody, I won't spoil anything in the book by saying it was 14 years full of fights with the National Football League. I mean, that is not going to be a spoiler. And those fights kind of play out in the context of collective bargaining, lawsuits, litigation. So it lends itself for a lawyer to naturally take notes. I obviously had to stay away from the things that were privileged, but for good and for bad, and I do mean mostly for bad, the stories were just kind of seared into me, and the note taking was just a thing that was cathartic in a way, but also necessary for me to do my job. I came into this business not really knowing anything about sports. So I kind of approached it as an, overly indulgent, anal retentive lawyer. And unfortunately, man, we know how to take a lot of notes.
Yeah.
We
Well,
do.
what I found was interesting too is you just brought it up. You weren't necessarily a sports fan. You weren't necessarily a football fan, with the exception of going to some Redskins games
Yeah.
with your father. But it's funny because when I was hiring people to work for a sports team, if the first thing they said was, "I'm a real big fan
Uh,
of this team," I would immediately cross them off the list,
100%.
right?
100%.
You know,
And I know that sounds counterintuitive
right.
for folks, but when you have a job inside of sport, what I always try to remind students, I want to be an agent, I want to be an executive, I want to work for a team. The first thing you have to level set is you are not going to be out back pitching the ball back and forth between you and Drew Brees. I mean, that's not the day. And the job within sport, I think, is easier and to a certain extent, better accomplished with people who are not fans,
Right.
because the fan part will color the way in which you do the job. And for a lawyer whose job is literally myopically to make the players better tomorrow than they were yesterday, you almost, well, not even almost, you have to consider that the game, the team, the lore of football, the fandom, all of those things are whatever it is, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, 25th, 30th. And for me, especially when, I know we're going to talk a little bit about the health and safety, especially the way we handled concussions. I'll never forget getting to that emotional and philosophical point in that job to say, oh, wait, I have to philosophically believe that my job one day might be recommending that no one play football. Right? Because that's the
Right.
only way to keep yourself honest that you're absolutely doing everything you can to make the game safer. If you are trying to square the game with safety at some point, and the league is very good at this, they leverage the game against you. I'll never forget, for example, Mark Murphy, who, let's just say knew better when we were talking about concussions. And, we were talking about the need to have a person on the field to make that decision, and it sometimes take that decision out of the hands of the team physician.
Sure.
And, Mark Murphy played for years. He was a former vice president of the NFLPA. At the time, he was the head of the Green Bay Packers. And I remember him saying, "Hey, D, well, that's really going to interrupt the flow of the game. Why don't we just make sure the doctor is like nearby in the stands?" And that's so absurd. But I think that when you approach it as the game should come first, you see how you get there. And I wanted to make sure that there was never a moment in my career where I was trading the game for the people that I was sworn to represent.
It was interesting to me, DeMaurice. You write about a scene where you're in a locker room, and I think you said this in many locker rooms, maybe all of them, where you introduced yourself to the players and said, I don't care about the game of football. I care about the guys who play football.
Yeah.
I'm curious. I know you got a range of reactions. You write about it, but overall, I mean, were you able to get that message through? Like, I don't care what happens on the field.
Yeah.
Well, I don't care about who wins or loses. I'm not watching as a fan. I care about you. Did they get that?
Mhm.
I think they got that because that was easier. That was one of the easier sells, to be dead honest with you, because I think the one thing that I do love and I did love about working with players is they have a acute bullshit monitor. And when it comes to a coach where they know the coach doesn't really care about them, their families, whether they're hurt or not, to a certain extent, they know even their agents are there because there's a financial relationship. They know that the owner is there and he might come down after the game and say, "Great game." But every player knows that no owner is going to lose a lick of sleep if that guy's got to throw himself into an ice bath in order to get into his car to drive home. So I think when they heard that there was somebody who actually didn't care, and I would even add that I'm likely not going to even watch you on Sunday. Um, it was just honest. And
Yeah.
I think that it is a group of people who have dealt with a group of people who haven't been tremendously honest with them for years. That was a pretty easy sell. Now, the first time that I went into a locker room and said that we have to hit less and take less painkillers, let's just say, eh, I've had easier days. I'd rather shovel John's driveway than go through and have another one of those conversations.
Yeah. So, DeMaurice, I know that, you're initial, getting into the job wasn't to be that of a fan, but representing the players as objectively as possible. Now that you've had a chance to step away from the day to day of running the Players Association, are you watching more football? Can you actually maybe enjoy it now?
I've watched more football. I probably watched more football this year than I have for the last 15. I don't. I mean, the college games have been to me absolutely bananas.
Yeah,
And getting ready for the game tonight. The playoff games have been insane. I still don't really watch a lot of regular season games. It's just, there's something about like a Sunday, or even a Saturday. I mean, I can give it like a couple of hours, but I don't think I'll ever be that 9 a.m. in the morning fan till midnight.
right.
There's just too many books to read. I mean, there's just too many books. I have a thing about the New York Times Sunday paper, like from beginning to end, that I just crave. And that's just too hard to fit in with too many games over the Sundays. But I probably honestly, I probably watched more this year than all 14 years combined.
Right, right, right. Well, you said about reading books, and I see there you've got quite the library behind you. But, when it comes to a book like Turf Wars, you're writing books. We've had a few authors on here, at Skin in the Game, and we've had anywhere from 2 years to 8 years to write a book. What was the duration for this one?
This one, the idea of it started in, I would say, late 2013, early 2014. Once we got through the lockout, and then, I don't know, I forget what gate we went into, what any given years between,
Mhm.
Deflate Gate, Bounty Gate, Ray Rice, Kaepernick, all of it kind of strung
Mhm.
together. But I do remember coming out of the lockout, or at least 2 years coming out of the lockout, thinking, okay, this is something that is so unique, that nobody's really written about what this is, but it certainly fits into um, traditional frames of the civil rights movement, the trade unionist movement, that I felt that I wanted to write something that wasn't that again wasn't a third and long book. And by the time I got to 2015, 2016, I just became convinced that if I didn't write this, who would?
Right, right.
And I think that for folks who kind of live in that world where we feel like so many authors before us, gave us the tools, by which we, you know, somehow, maneuver our way through our future. A whole different ball game by Marvin Miller. And I talk about Marvin a lot in the book, because he both terrified me and inspired me. I'm not sure which one was more, but I wanted to write that whole different ball game. I wanted to write that the most dangerous man in America, the Walter Reuther book. I wanted to, so much of what we did was, at least to me, inspired by Saul Alinsky and the people who were the architects of the civil rights movement. Football, the business of football is such a strange ecosystem, that there was a story to tell, but I wanted to tell it in a way that was consistent with all the other things that we've done. And kind of the final frame of it was, I really started off with this idea, or contemplation, that the National Football League was a microcosm of the country, especially coming out of 2017. And then I came to the conclusion at the end of the book that America is becoming more and more run like the National Football League. And those just kind of became the themes. Now, of course, those were my ideas. The
Mhm.
most unbelievable thing is that there was a publisher who actually agreed with me. So, I thought it was interesting. But having the good folks at Random House, the editors there were tremendous, are tremendous. And I just came out with a great story that really wanted to put that last piece of family
Yeah.
into it.
Yeah, and again, Tim and I have both had the opportunity to actually Tim read it, I listened to it,
Oh, oh.
which was great. What's the reaction been? You mentioned, you're not expecting too many holiday gifts from
No.
the NFL owners, but how has the reaction been really among the players that you may have spoke to?
Yeah, I haven't heard a lot from players, and that's not terribly surprising. I've heard
Mhm.
far more from former players who have read the book, and either guys who knew, had my cell or DM me on social media. They loved it. Again, there's never been that story told from that perspective of the player. Um, Owners, I've heard that they aren't happy, but if if my job was, um, if I went into this business to make them happy, I probably wouldn't have become the executive director to begin with.
Right, right.
The most interesting, and honestly, the one of the more fascinating reactions, at least to me, has been um the traditional journalist press, everybody from Politico to Atlantic to the Wall Street Journal to the Times, traditional journalism. It's been great for that kind of response because I wanted to write a book that every journalist would appreciate for the fact checking, the to your point, the specificity of the book.
Yeah, right.
Um, the absolute silence from the majority of sports journalists has been interesting, but not surprising. And I kind of have come to the conclusion that, the critiqued rarely love the critique. And I'm absolutely fine with that.
Yeah. Yeah.
It
Yeah.
Yeah, and well, I can tell you, I mean, reading it as a journalist who's written quite a bit about NFL business, and for your context and DeMaurice, in the context of people out there, mine is covering the deal for the Buffalo Bills stadium.
Yep.
So
Oh, yeah.
less so your world with the players, but very,
Oh,
very
no.
much
I
so.
I read everything you wrote.
Yeah, and I would imagine, and my guess is, without even you and I having any discussion about it, and I will say this on reflection too. I think there's quite a bit to critique about
Oh.
what I wrote, what I asked, what I didn't ask. You got me thinking. You got me thinking with this book. And John, when we're reflecting on our conversation later with DeMaurice, we should you and I can jump into that a little bit
Mhm.
more. But DeMaurice, there's something you wrote, and I have it down here in front of me. I'm going to read it to you and for everybody listening and watching. Now, this was it resonates with what you're saying right now, and this was in the context of Bounty Gate, which is going back about 10 years, a little more than 10 years,
Wow.
when the New Orleans Saints were found to be putting a bounty on taking out guys from the other team.
Yep.
You wrote, "I couldn't believe how many people were willing to lie, cheat, steal, or just go along with whatever the league wanted them to do." And you were writing about one investigation there, but
Yeah.
I think it's a bigger statement, right? And tell us about that. Tell us about that realization you came to, and with the bigger messages behind it.
Yeah, look, I'm permanently either scarred or framed, by being a homicide prosecutor as long as I was, and a lawyer as long as I was. When you're in a case, criminal case and a civil case with a big law firm, I mean, look, everybody is hired to take a side, and I'm used to certainly the bare knuckle way in which that game is played. Um, Dealing with the league, that was really the first time that I was met with just sort of a blatant willingness to either ignore the truth or a blatant decision to not tell the truth. And I I mean, look, again, you come from a world where it's winner take all, and nobody paid my ridiculous hourly salary at Latham and Watkins to be a nice guy. You're used to that, but there were always lines that you just couldn't cross. And so whether we were dealing with certain journalists who wrote things that either they wrote and didn't know, or they did know and they wrote them anyway, or you're dealing with the league's investigative memo where it turns out that it's just not true. The willingness to double down on all of that smacks lawyers like me as okay, I get the whole moral unwillingness to abide by the truth part, but lawyers are literally slaves to the process, right? And it's that willingness to ignore due process and basic tenements of fairness that I just found shocking. And you know, uh, to a certain extent, Bounty was kind of my baptism into the National Football League, and it changed the way that we went about, um, at least the way that I went about deciding the way in which we were going to react to these things. Because I'm sure the league, never really liked the fact that I was willing to fight as public as they wouldn't want me to do. But that literally becomes the only measure by which there's some level of accountability. And Bounty ended up, again, at the end, Paul Tagliabue comes in at the end of that and writes an opinion that overturns the suspensions of all of the players. But again, the moral turn of all that, right? The coaches, and by the way, there was enough fault to go around when it came to the coaches, but the coaches, because they weren't represented by a union, had no recourse. And I just found Bounty to be that perfect storm of what's right, what's wrong, what's due process, what's not, what's the role of a union, what's not. It's complicated because on one hand, we're representing players who could have been harmed by the allegations. At the same time, we have this duty as a union to defend the people. So again, that was probably the baptism, but I also know that was the moment where I realized that a majority of my job had to become a teacher, explaining to the players that yes, we can defend and protect the players, and we are zero sum about health and safety with our left hand. Can we 100% defend the players that we have an obligation to defend with our right hand? Yes. And those two things are exclusive, but they both fall within the purview of the union. And that education process that frankly, we had to have with players and some sports writers, was, became that moment where I just kind of realized that, wait a minute, the NFL and sports is this strange ecosystem where, for whatever reason, everybody believes that it should operate without any any boundaries that relate to how we conduct ourselves in everyday life.
Yeah, yeah,
And I just find that to be strange.
yeah.
And
Well,
and so
it's getting stranger. It's
it's
getting
getting
stranger.
stranger.
I mean, just, with ESPN owns a piece of the NFL and they own the NFL network. I mean, where are the boundaries to your point?
I think that it is much worse now.
Mm,
I think
mhm.
that you have and again, the parallels to what's happening in the country are unavoidable. It's the complexity has led to complicity, and then that leads to the lack of accountability. But ESPN is literally a first year law school's exam of conflicts.
Yeah, right,
Right. I mean, you
right.
have the NFL owning a piece of an organization that at least part of their arm is to hold the NFL accountable as investigative journalists. You have a group of journalists within ESPN who call themselves insiders, whose literal job is to uncover information that is material and non public. And their job is to somehow use that material and tell, us, the fans, At the same time, they're promoting gambling to which they have an ownership interest in. And the last turn of the screw is all of this operates without the traditional boundaries that you would find in a reputable newspaper. And so, and again, the thing that kind of drives me the most nuts is, other than us talking about it, it's not like the New York Times is writing an expose of how do you avoid conflicts. I mean,
Right.
I mean, as a lawyer, if they hired me to be either the ombudsman or the chair of compliance, I honestly don't know how you would do that, right? I mean, what happens if Adam Schefter gets a certain tip about something that has an impact on the line for the game? Does he does he tell it? Does he not tell it?
Right. Does he have to check things out with people on Park Avenue?
I
Right.
just once again, and
Right.
I wrote an article recently for the Athletic and for the New York Times about gambling, and herein 'tis the rub. It's I'm not really besmirching. Okay, I am the fact that they that the league has an ownership interest in a news network. I think that's just not good. Um, but if you're going to do it, the way to do it is to be overt and explicit about how we handle conflicts and how we handle accountability structures. And once again, sport is the only place where I know that everybody just kind of operates as if everything is okay. And I think that when it comes to the human quotient, unlike selling, a can of Coke or a can of soup, sport is one of the few businesses that operates with a human commodity.
Well, it's interesting too. I think back over time, even let's say when daily newspapers, regional and national,
Yeah.
were thriving. There would be, you would never see a business reporter or a local government reporter for a daily newspaper share an opinion in print. You'd see the columnists do that, right?
Right.
In sports, that, in big newspapers and small ones back in the day, and certainly now,
Yep.
the beat reporter will opine on any number of topics, whether it's on social media or in print, and it does go beyond analysis too. So it feels like, John, I'm sure you've seen this from the inside. I mean, that line in sports has always been blurred.
Yeah.
It feels like it's that blurriness might be in a more dangerous spot right now. Is that fair to say, DeMaurice?
I think it's definitely in a dangerous spot because I think that the greatest risk we have, and I think the greatest risk we have in our democracy is when we believe that things that should not be normal become normalized. And I think that when journalists in the sports world don't report that they're going to parties paid for by the National Football League, I think that's a problem. I think when they have their own exclusive Super Bowl junkets, I think it's a problem. And I think if ESPN opens every day without telling the watchers or the viewers that this is a company that is partially owned by the subject that we are covering, I think it's deliberately disingenuous.
Yeah.
And then it becomes normal. And so, to me, is there a straight line between you wake up one morning and my hometown newspaper gets raided by the FBI and they're executing search warrants at the Washington Post? And, I can tell, I'm not going to make any judgment on how old we are, but all of us who are in this remember a thing called Watergate, and not even Nixon served subpoenas on the Washington Post or on Woodward or on Bernstein. And, if I'm reading the Post and it's still my hometown newspaper, if I'm looking online on their online post section and the story that they've been rated by the Post is the number 6 story on their webpage. I'm like, okay, what 5 stories could possibly be more important than this one?
Right.
Yeah.
And I think the last line of defense for democracy has always been the fourth estate. And we can go on all day about where
Right.
we are with that, but I did a show for CBS, and okay, they just aired the Venezuela story yesterday for the first time, and I think that those are the things that I think that I teach a class called Leadership, Law, and Ethics in Sport, and I've taught it now for a version of it for 8 years. Um, it takes everybody about 5 weeks to realize that I'm not teaching a sports class. I'm teaching an America class. And if you can use sport and talk about the NFL, if you can use sport and talk about, okay, what does the Rooney Rule really mean? Yes, we're talking about race, but I'm also talking about ugh, maybe maybe I'm also talking about that this is still one of the greatest challenges that America has never learned to reckon with. If you can talk about due process, in whether it's bounty or Deflategate, you can talk about the roles of unions and the necessity of having clear cut boundaries in the law. So, when you can take issues of race, gender, power, class, and talk about it with sports, it becomes a really good Gedanken experiment, right? For talking about it in the country. Now, that's
Yeah.
also
Yeah.
why almost every bro guy drops my class by week 5.
But DeMaurice, here's why it's, there's some of our listeners saying, "Oh, it's only sports. It's only
Right.
football. Why does it matter?"
Yeah.
Well, here's why it matters because yes, it is about equality. It is about due process. It's also about, you know, economy and tax, incentives. I mean,
Yeah.
it's not just about sports. And if there's no one, watching, the chicken coop here,
Yeah.
it's coming out of our pocketbooks and it goes beyond that. So it's not just about the NFL.
No, and I get people's frustration, when I don't nearly get into the bits and bats of, some guy at the bar who wants to argue with me. I don't get into those as much as I used to. Believe me, I used to just go as hard as I could. Now I just want to drink. But you talk about things like that. I mean, it's no mistake that the NFL goes out of its way to brand football with America. And I think that's great. I just think that if you want to talk about America, let's just talk about it truthfully and honestly, as opposed to the kind of the convenient, 4x4 flyover version. And no, I mean, there's no way that I would ever want to do my job, representing Colin Kaepernick and somehow divorce that from sport. I mean, you're talking about at least this year, what, a $24 billion industry that just gave up their 501(c)(6) nonprofit status a few years ago.
Crazy. Yeah.
It's it's crazy.
It's crazy. Yeah.
And look, I get it, but that becomes a very convenient way to talk about our interesting tax policy in America. And so I think that, I have always tried to use sport as a professor to force conversations in with sport by using sport to have these. You can force these sort of very clean conversations about, okay, should a 25 or back then $14 billion a year business have a 501(c)(6) nonprofit status? We can talk about that. And for some reason, that is a much cleaner conversation than if you then move over and say, "Hey, we should change our tax policy to perhaps getting, more tax revenue from people who earn more than $1 billion." For all of a sudden, then you're getting in whole sorts of conversations about the free enterprise system and the founding fathers, and that's what I mean, like, I get it. But man, if you talk about it in the context of football, everybody goes, "Well, wait a minute, that's insane."
Right.
Well, DeMaurice, here's a simple point you made in the book that really struck me. For many NFL players, that first team they're on, that's their first job. You know,
Yeah.
these are guys who went through high school,
Yeah.
college, really devoted to a sport, but not doing a paper route, not working at McDonald's, not serving coffee, not
And that's a
right.
problem. That's a problem because, you take that realistic lack of understanding your role as an employee, and then you layer it, right, with this is my hope and my dream, and when I get drafted, I'm gonna walk across the stage and I'm gonna hug Roger Goodell like, that he has given me something. Roger hasn't given you anything. I mean, if you weren't one of the top 250 players in the country, there's no hug. I mean, that dude's not walking down Park Avenue just handing out hugs every day. No. So the problem becomes, you lack sort of a fundamental understanding of the difference between management and labor. You're at a point where this is the only thing that you've ever dreamed of, and here comes some short guy into your locker room, like banging a table, talking about the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire and Ludlow, and you got a bunch of guys looking like, okay, this guy is absolutely insane, but you have to shock them out of this idea that the league is their benefactor. Because the first thing that you understand, whether you have a paper route or for me, I was working at a pizza place. The first thing that you realize when you have any one of those minimum wage jobs, you realize that, man, the only thing they really want from you is you come to work. I mean, nobody cares about whether you've had a bad day, girlfriend problems, boyfriend problems, problems at home, you don't feel particularly well, you're trying to juggle all that. Nobody cares. It's a pure transactional relationship where I come to work, I do the work, I get paid, and then I leave. Trying to convince players of that transactional relationship is, as you can imagine, antithetical to everything they hear. Everything. I hate to pick on the Bills now because I'm sorry. It's a tough weekend. I get it. By the way, I was stunned that Sean McDermott got fired. I was absolutely
Yeah,
stunned.
you and a lot of people.
Stunned. Stunned. But does Sean McDermott understand that this is a transactional relationship? Yes. He's not a Bill, right? And so what I try to tell a group of young people, the reason why you have a pension, the reason why you've got limitations on the number of your hours, the reason why you've got access to 401k, to workers' comp, to benefits, and if anything goes wrong, somebody from the union is going to ride in, and wage war on your behalf. The only reason you have those things is players before you realized that this was a transactional relationship, and they have paved this way for you. And frankly, the only benefactor, um, is to these former players. And I think, what you see, and again, the parallels to what's going on in the country, um, it's been a while since people have had to really fight for something. And then the question becomes not so much do they have the tools to fight, or it's whether you have the will. And that, if we lose the will to fight for the things that we think important, I mean, that's the end. And I talk about that in Turf Wars as well. It becomes a very tough job when you are trying to make sure that you have people who have the will.
You brought up concussions and player safety, and you're correct. We were going to as well. As you look back, and I'll editorialize here for a minute. I can't imagine there's something more important than trying to make this inherently dangerous game as safe as possible for the people playing it, right? As you look back, how do you assess the work you did in your role in where you were able to get things? I mean,
Yeah.
how much more is there to go? Do you feel okay about where you got it?
I feel tremendously proud, and it had very little to do with me, and a lot to do with the player leadership back then. I look at I did watch the Patriots Texans game, and to think that D'Amico Ryans and Mike Vrabel were both union reps, during that war in 2011. The guys who really embraced this idea that we could actually make the game safer were two linebackers, right? And and so I'm really happy about where it was. I mean, I think I'll get to I think your question at the end is, are you happy where things are? The answer is no. Because I think from where we started, I think the job of a union leader is to never be happy where things are with health and safety. I learned sitting at the right side of Rich Trumka, who represented coal miners for most of his life. I don't think Rich was ever happy about the state of health and safety for a coal miner. It's better. But to think that when I took the job in 2009, the head of the league's concussion committee was a rheumatologist. The name of the committee was the Mild Traumatic Brain Injury Committee, which is anybody who can put mild
Right.
in
A
front
little
of
bit of an
traumatic brain.
oxymoron. Yeah.
Only the National Football League
Yeah.
can put mild in front of traumatic brain injury. And to think, yeah, you know, sideline concussion experts didn't exist, baseline testing didn't exist, concussion protocols didn't exist. And now I am pretty sure that there probably isn't a kid in junior high school who plays sports that hasn't had a baseline testing. And if something bad happens, doesn't go through some version of a concussion protocol. And so I'm really happy that something we did in the leagues trickled down all the way to youth sports. What I'm not happy about, frankly, is it's still so hard for players, and some of it is self-inflicted, to get everything they are due with workers' compensation. And I will say there's a tremendous lawyer who lives in Buffalo who represented the players for years on workers' comp. I'm not blowing smoke. The Bills were the best workers' comp team in the country. And why is it important? Because workers' comp gives every injured player lifetime health care for the injuries they suffer at work. Lifetime. And so that became I'm gonna throw it's gonna be a rough stat. I'm not gonna die on the hill, but my guess would be that when I took the job in 2009, I bet most teams averaged less than 30% of the players either seeking or getting workers' comp. By the time I left, that was in probably its high 60s. But when you talk about again in America, what leads most families to bankruptcy or economic hard times? An uncovered medical cost, right? And so within the NFL system, the union fought for workers' comp. The fact that the fact that the rate of players getting workers' comp isn't the same rate as the 100% of the players who get injured, I still consider that a loss.
Yeah. Yeah. DeMaurice, as we look to wrap up, health and safety, there's always more we can be doing, the league can be doing. Are there other things that you'd like to see or you wish we could all see over the next couple of years when it comes to the players in the league?
Yeah, I think, there's a you can't avoid sort of a certain narrative of, I've watched what's happened with the NFLPA since I left. And that's been frankly heartbreaking to watch, for so many reasons. And I'm sure there are tons of reasons. My worry is um, that 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 over time, and again, it's one of the things that I constantly look at, maybe it's my failure, that inability to cultivate, the D'Amico Ryans, the Mike Vrabels, the Jeff Saturdays, the Dominique Foxworths, the Drew Breeses, the Tom Brady, the Peyton Manning, those were guys who stepped up to the plate in a major way for the entire time that I was the executive director. And it made the job of kind of being the tip of that spear, really easy, because it was easy to frame the job that I work for what's in the best interest of the players, and man, literally everything else be damned, and it certainly wasn't an easy job, but that part wasn't hard.
Mhm.
I think the thing that worries me now is again going back to the country. Man, apathy is our greatest enemy. And the unwillingness to understand that all of the things, at least the things that truly made America great, all came with sacrifice. I mean, there's just literally nothing that was, handed, I should say,
Yeah.
to a nascent country that didn't come without a fight. And the history of progress in this country, whether it's women's rights, civil rights, fair wage, 40-hour work weeks, pensions. I mean, I Saul Alinsky told this wonderful story about Rochester, New York, and the workers there battling the Kodak plant. My only question is do we have people who are willing to fight? And I don't know how you do that anymore.
So it's
I
that next generation of leadership among the teams, right? That's what we're kind of looking
Yeah,
for.
well,
Yeah.
and man, focusing on what matters. I just, the battles with the league. And by the way, we really didn't spend a lot of time talking about my BFF Roger Goodell, and we're so close. But I have to tip my cap to them. They're really good, and he and the league are the most formidable people that I have ever gone up against in my, whatever it is, 35 years of being a lawyer. The only reason we got anything was the willingness of the players to engage in the fight. And somewhere along the line, I think there became this sort of convenient narrative that maybe fighting is wrong. Maybe we should somehow try to find, mutual ground, and maybe we should engage the owners as equal partners in this thing. They will never view you as an equal partner. And anything along that lines is sophistry. And so my hope is that a union that Gene built and Ed Garvey built and I inherited. My hope is that they fix the things that they need to desperately fix, and engage, because I do believe that this collective bargaining agreement is up in 2030. The league is going to make a decision about how they're going to fight the players within the next 12 months. That's just the
Yeah.
way that
Well,
they
yeah.
think. Um,
Yeah. Well, with that, DeMaurice, I want to thank you for joining us. I also want to, I think Turf Wars, the book you wrote, I wish we could have it as mandatory reading for
Mm.
any player in the league or any player who's looking to, be fortunate enough to play in the league, because I think this dialogue and, these topics, are mandatory reading in my mind. And I just thank you for bringing this up. And also, really want to encourage our listeners, even if you're not necessarily a diehard fan of the NFL, this is also, I think, as you said, a little bit of a history book as well. So encourage folks to pick up Turf Wars.
Man, thank you. Those are kind words, and I really appreciate it. And look, for folks who want to dive into the bone marrow and crawl through it and really appreciate the business of the business, thank you guys for having this podcast and having me on.
Oh, we so appreciate having you, DeMaurice. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you guys. This was a blast.
Thank you. Skin in the Game. We'll be right back.
Authenticity isn't something you manufacture. It's something you experience.
At Holiday Valley, winter unfolds across fun slopes and the true ski town of Ellicottville, ranked number 4 in the East by Ski Magazine. Winter is better here.
Hey, welcome back to Skin in the Game. And again, DeMaurice Smith, thank you for joining us on the program today. Tim, I want to really also thank you for bringing DeMaurice Smith into the podcast.
You're not mad at me for making you read yet another book?
No, and actually, as I said, I did listen to it, and quite interesting. And I got to say, we do need to bring DeMaurice back onto the show because there's so much to dig into.
I've got a whole list of questions here, John, and I know you do too. That we didn't even come close to getting to. And by the way, for folks out there who, as much as I joke about getting John to read a bunch of books here on Skin in the Game, we're both avid readers. We've both read quite a bit this year. This book is especially well written. I'll tell you what, it's an easy read, but man, John, it's a tough read.
Comprehensive, though. I mean,
It's
is.
comprehensive, and I can tell you too, and I'm saying this from the sports journalist, longtime, football business journalist side. It's a tough read that makes you question yourself. And, he and I got into that a bit in the conversation. And there's some NFL executives and other NFL figures who I'm quite fond of personally, who he takes to task. And that is okay. That is good. That is great. That's part of the deal when you get into this business. But he holds absolutely no punches, and I respect that.
Yeah, no, it's the bottom line is the NFL is big business. The players are employees who in many cases are, non-guaranteed contracts. And what I found great about the book as well as DeMaurice is he didn't come in, his job was simple. I'm representing the best interests of the players. And he had, and if you read the book, encourage our listeners to do that. I mean, these were battles that he had forged, to defend the players, to defend the rank and file, when he went up against the machine, which is the NFL. Some really interesting stories. The one that I wanted to get into, DeMaurice, and it's not I'm not going to discourage people from reading it, but there's a great chapter about that insurance policy that he took out on behalf of the players should they, go on strike. And that was in
Master
many
move.
ways the silver bullet that saved a season. Just remarkable story, and the attention to detail to to recount that story.
Yeah, a $47 million insurance premium that the NFLPA paid so that they could cash in for, multiple, and just exponential amount from there.
Right.
And give the players the ability to say, well, yeah, lock us out, see how long you last. And there was, we'll put it this way, fans got to see a lot more football that particular season because of DeMaurice Smith's strategy. And so
Exactly.
yeah, you
And
talk about
when to
drawing a line.
and when to use that trump card. And it was really interesting how there was also the story with, him and his relationship with Tom Brady to ultimately get the news back to Robert Kraft, who then got that news back to the rest of the owners
Right.
and completely changed the dynamic of those negotiations.
Yeah, no, just fat. I mean, that's where it really reads like it's a gripping story at
Yeah.
times.
Yeah.
John, you bring up Tom Brady. Here's an interesting one. I was laughing a little as I read this. Brady, as is well known, earns tens of millions, hundreds of millions playing football. But I think the number is 60, by some projections, perhaps 60 million, 60 million less than he could have because he, the story goes, he wanted to give Robert Kraft and the Patriots the ability to sign other guys or keep other guys. So he gave up a little bit of money. And 60 million is a little
bit,
right?
yeah,
A
right.
little bit, just 60. But he gave up, he did quite well, but he gave up some money for the team. And if you're DeMaurice Smith running the NFLPA, that is not a good thing because you want to set that standard, in this case, of a position of quarterback. as high as possible, it drives up every other quarterback salary. Same thing is true, usually for less money, at the other positions too.
Right, right. Great insights. What we didn't get into, and we're going to get DeMaurice back on. We didn't get into kind of the evolution of now private equity going into the NFL ownership, the influence, and I think DeMaurice did allude to the negative influence of gambling, in the sport, and it's going to be interesting to see how those evolve over the next few months and years. But a great conversation. Super interesting guy, and we could have talked to him for hours and hours, and we will get him back.
Oh, for sure. It'll be great. I want to throw, before we wrap, John, I do want to throw in one other tidbit that you and I didn't get a chance to talk about, but I'm guessing this jumped out at you too. The CBA, collective bargaining agreement that DeMaurice helped negotiate and engineer, about 15 years ago, that addressed the salary cap and the
Mhm.
spending floor on the
Right.
salary cap and forced every team to spend at least 89% of whatever the cap was that year. There were a few teams, and some of these will be familiar to our listeners. The Buffalo Bills were one, the Cincinnati Bengals were another, the Kansas City Chiefs were a third. Buffalo, KC, and Cincinnati, among others, were consistently spending below that floor. They weren't coming anywhere near the cap until they were mandated to do so. And around the time they were mandated to do so, their on-field performance started going up and up and up. And so I just named three, not this year, but three over the years, perennial contenders.
Right.
And, so again, you want to look at how can a union chief impact what happens on the field and what fans see. That's another way right there.
Yeah, and I think, overall, I think that's really helped the league in terms of parity. We don't see that in Major League Baseball. The discrepancy between the Dodgers and the Pirates payrolls, for example, are hundreds of millions of dollars apart. So I think from an NFL perspective, having that cap and that floor has really helped with the balance of the league. And I think ultimately that's good for fans because whatever market you live in, you want to know your team at least has a chance, right?
Any given Sunday. That's a phrase he doesn't always take too kindly in the book. But yeah, on any given Sunday, or at least any given year, every
Yeah.
team theoretically
Yeah.
has a chance. And you can believe that in football.
Yeah. So again, Turf Wars is the book. DeMaurice Smith, the former executive leader with the NFLPA, is the author. Encourage everyone to go out there and read it, and I think there'll be something of interest to any sports fan or, quite frankly, fan of business.
Absolutely. It's a good read. It's a tough read. It's a necessary read. Have at it. John, we'll see you next week.
Right. Thanks for listening, and thanks for the great interview.